Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to begin in the second chapter of the book of Genesis, and there's a lot of significant stuff in here. We read of the origin of the Sabbath, the creation of man and woman, and the Edenic order, and it's connected between the first and the third chapters, and the conclusion of the first chapter ends with Elohim declaring that all is good, and in the third chapter we don't read of anything bad or evil until the serpent appears, the adversary appears in the form of the serpent. So chapter 2 really connects the momentum of goodness that's established in the closing verse, and it reveals much of the purpose of the created items, most specifically ourselves. And we read in the 28th and 26th through 28th verse of the preceding chapter that we are endowed with the image, and this plays a role in being so endowed. It comes attached to the responsibility of righteous stewardship, and we see that reflected in the Edenic order. And so the opening verse reads, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, in all their array." So in the previous chapter, we read of the creation account, and it was a 6-day process, and each day he added a new element of existence and progressively refined it according to an inexorable and predetermined order, which took the span of 6 days. He could have created it in an instant, but he, for whatever reason, he did it in 6 days, and it was all complete. That means full. There's nothing more to add to. All that's left to do is maintain it. And on the seventh day, Elohim completed his work, which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work, which he had made. Now, the first error we want to avoid is to assume that he rested because he was tired. He is an inexhaustible creature, and as such, he is indefatigable. He cannot get tired. There's no physical task that's too monumental or straining for him. So he did not rest in the sense that we do when we sleep. He rested more in the sense that an attorney will rest their case, because in the antecedent verse we learned that everything was completed, so there's no reason for a lawyer to continue arguing when he's made all the argument necessary. And the seventh day would have been what corresponds to our calendar day of Saturday, and we're going to get into the Sabbath observance controversy in Judeo-Christianity as the discourse develops. "And Elohim blessed the seventh day and made it sacred, because on it he rested from all his work, which Elohim in creating had made." So in so sanctifying it, he set a precedent which was to be an example emulated by his chosen people, the Hebrews, who were commanded by the covenant to on every Saturday of every week to observe a day of rest from physical labor and worldly commerce, and to enter into worship and fellowship. And that had a rejuvenating effect, which they were wise to heed. "These are the birth of the heavens and the earth, which when they were created, in that day that Yahweh Elohim made earth and heaven." So earth and heaven, in some sense, encompasses the entire creative process. We read in Genesis 1:1 that in the beginning he created the heavens and the earth. Earth is everything we know and experience on this pale blue dot we reside in, which is infinitesimal compared to the heavens. So the vastness of heavens is an awesome witness to his infinite grandeur. "Now no shrub of the field was yet on the earth, and no plant of the field had yet sprung up, for Yahweh Elohim had not sent rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground." So in the original created earth, this is antediluvian. Diluvian is the flood period, which we read of in Noah, beginning in the 6th chapter all the way through the 10th. But prior to the flood, the earth rejuvenated itself through water, through springing its source from the ground. So we don't read of rain occurring until the flood. So we want to imagine how foolish Noah must have looked when he was building an ark in the middle of land. But they weren't left to laugh at him when all was said and done. "But a mist went up from the earth and watered the entire surface of the ground." So I said much of what I could have said before that I should have saved for after, but just to reiterate once more, the self-replenishing operation consisted of mist, which rejuvenated the earth, and it came from the ground, not the sky. And Yahweh Elohim formed the man out of dust, and from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils breath of life, and the man became a living being. So the only earlier inference we have to our creation is the 26th through 28th verse, wherein we learn that we are endowed with the image, but the image is something of spiritual significance, but we learn that there's nothing special about our physical composures. We are neither the most strong animal in the animal kingdom. We are neither the most beautiful animal in the animal kingdom. We are from the dust, same as everyone else. And what gives us truly life is the image, which endows us with certain capacities which are unique amongst creation. And Yahweh Elohim planted a garden in Eden to the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. So he not only created a man, but he created a garden for him. So Adam was essentially living on Easy Street in Eden before he succumbed to sin and wickedness and disease and death entered the scene, and he surrendered dominion of the earth to the adversary. So the Eden, I think there may be an allusion coming up that gives us a more precise location, but we know that it was somewhere in the ancient Near East, and it was a garden which survives as the model of paradise, which has been lost. And out of the ground Yahweh Elohim made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, with the tree of life in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So we read of two trees, and these are going to be significant. There's the tree of life and the tree of good and knowledge, and we eventually read that the sole commandment issued from divinity to man was a prohibition against eating of its fruit, because from that fruit they came to a knowledge of good and evil. They knew what it was like to live apart from Elohim, which is essentially what sin does. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided and became four riverheads. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one surrounding the entire land of Havilah, where there is gold. So these geographical references are going to be more familiar to their original audience than us. Like we said, we know it's somewhere in the Middle East. We just don't know where. And but it is, we imagine, a place of beauty and abundance. And of the gold of that land is good. Bdellium is there, and the Shoham stone. And the name of the second river is Gihon. It is the one surrounding the entire land of Cush. Cush, we can claim with assurance, was an ancient nation in sub-Saharan Africa. So it might be so that connects the place, the location, with more specific precision. We're not entirely sure, in all honesty, of what the river Gihon translates. We should have researched it, but in all honesty, we didn't. So we're just going to move on. And the name of the third river is Hiddekel, and it is the one which goes toward the east of Assyria. And the fourth river is Perath. So Assyria was a country located to the northeast of Israel, about 500 miles thereabout, and Egypt was the land to the southwest. So these are somewhere in between them that Adam and Eve originally sired the human race. And Yahweh Elohim took the man and put him in the garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. So the garden was created for a purpose that was to give him sustenance, and he would know sustenance through labor. So he had to till there was a minimal effort involved, but so he wasn't, hunting the way Paleolithic man was forced to be reduced to. And Yahweh Elohim commanded the man, saying, Eat of every tree of the garden, but do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in that day you shall certainly die. This is no idle boast. Now, a day, there is frequent scriptural calculations based on a passage in one of the Peters and one of the Psalms, which compares a single day to 1,000 years in the span of Yahweh, and that just means that time is meaningless to him because he literally exists and inhabits throughout the entire span of eternity and all at once. But Adam did eventually die, we read, at 930 years of age. So in that sense, he did die today. And sin, the consequence of sin is death. And it is the cosmic consequences for emitting a negative contribution to creation. So we, above any other creative creatures, are morally responsible to leave the world in which we live a better place than the one we left. And Yahweh Elohim said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I am going to make a helper for him as his counterpart." So herein we read Adam had pre-existed Eve, and because Eve and Adam were both created beings, they did not come into being through the normal sexual process. So they were created in full maturity. And we read that Adam was created from the dust, and from Adam is where Eve springs. And she's the function she was supposed to fulfill was a helper, so he saw that he was lonely and noticed a vacancy and addressed the need accordingly. And from the ground Yahweh Elohim formed every beast of the field and every bird of the heavens, and brought them to the man to see what he would call them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So Adam functioned as the world's original biologist, or more specifically a zoologist. So therein we understand that man was not designed to wander in ignorance on the earth in which we live. He was illuminated with intelligence and given license to exercise it accordingly to name all the creatures he was superior to. So the man gave names to all the livestock, and to the birds of the heavens, and to every beast of the field. But for the man there was not found a helper for him, as his counterpart. So even though he enjoys a superior station above every created animal, he is still alone, and this perplexes Yahweh initially, and he quickly resolves it. There's no time frame as to how long this all took place, but so Yahweh Elohim caused a deep sleep to fall on the man, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Now there's a modern radical feminist inflict a lot of unnecessary injury on the scripture with their interpretations born of their extremist worldview. They think it's degrading that a man would come from the side of a woman, but remember, her declared function was to be his counterpart, so why not come from the side as opposed to the feet or anywhere else? So it's really meaningless. The symbolism behind the creation, the fact thereof, is enough to suffice, and should by right draw our exegetical intention. Emphasis. And the rib which Yahweh Elohim had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. So Eve's physical existence was derived from Adam's, so she was not created from the dust, but created from a creature who was created from the dust, and as such she too is destined to, her physical mortal body is destined to perish in the dust. And the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one is called woman, because she was taken out of a man." So Adam is pleased and delighted to have the satisfactory counterpart he, in all likelihood, didn't even know he wanted or needed. So that's really an act of benevolent grace from Yahweh to so provide him, and he is ecstatic in his claim of equality of my bones, flesh of my flesh. That means a oneness and a unity. And woman, the terminology is derivative. We can imagine that the prefix means out of man. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, and join unto his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So marriage, far from degrading the female, actually elevates her to an equality, and that enables love and joy and marriages. Happy, long, successful marriages are not products of accident, but of careful cultivation. And the deterioration of the family, it scarcely needs be said, is one of the tragedy of our times. But if we would all follow the model in Eden, then we would not be in the trouble we find ourselves in. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and yet they were not ashamed. So we understand in their pre-fallen state, there was no awareness that they were naked, and clothes do form a biological or a physical necessary, physically necessary function as a shelter element to our physical bodies, because we'd freeze otherwise. But they also serve a moral function in concealing lewd and indecent exposure. But they weren't aware of that because sin hadn't entered the picture. And had sin not entered the picture, they could have never had grown a conscience, which brings us to the next dispensation. That's something we'll pick up on a later date. Thank you so much. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.